Welcome everybody to part 2 of our special program on the Haiku stairs, past and future. So we talked a little bit about some of the issues around the stairs in the first episode and some of the misconceptions. One of the things we didn't get to in that episode, which we want to pick up now, is the issue of access. Because we did talk a little bit about some people, not the majority, but there's a minority of people that are opposed to the stairs because of concerns that there isn't access, and that's causing unofficial access through the neighborhoods and causing trespassing and disturbance to community members, which is a real problem. To be honest, we have that people have suffered for quite some time with intruders going through their backyard and causing all kinds of disturbances. Some of them don't feel safe, or they get interrupted in the middle of the night, and alarms go off, dogs start barking. So it is a problem. We talked a little, didn't we, Adriel? Right. And just to reintroduce my guest, Adriel Lam, Kai Hui resident, right, and member of the Friends and board member of Kai Hui Neighborhood Board. You've been talking to these residents. And just to recap, most of them were actually supportive of keeping the stairs, right?
Right. I think most of the neighbors, they like the stairs. They're also concerned about trespassing and how it impacts their neighbors. And so if there's a way to direct the traffic out of the neighborhood along the managed access, they were supportive of it.
Right. Okay. Right. So the problem, in theory, could be solved if we could find a better access that didn't involve going through people's backyards. Right. Nobody supports that. I mean, absolutely. So can we find access? The next slide actually gives a little picture, because there is kind of this misconception about the stairs. People think they start right at the base of some residential neighborhood, when in fact the stairs are located substantially away. They're at least a third of the mile from the closest house, and way up on this higher up on the slope on the other side, the Mauka side of H3. So if you're actually at the stairs, or back, when I climbed them in the 80s when they were open and legal, you would drive on a road. It's actually the road where it says DHHL on this map, and go right up that valley road to the Omega station, the Coast Guard station, and park far away from anybody's house. Mm-hmm. Right. And that road is still there, isn't it?
Right. And
you walked that road, in fact.
The parking pad is still there. You can put 30 cars there.
Yeah. I haven't actually been back there myself to look around, but you were walking it earlier. And
yeah, we do a regular periodic cleanup over in the back of the valley, and Kolau Foundation has been allowed access there to improve the lo'i and improve the kind of cultural understanding of the valley. So we go up there and do some cleanup, and we do get to see the Omega station and see the old road, and the infrastructure is still there.
Right. Right. So you could take that road and it would bypass the neighborhood. And it actually is not the only possibility. That's the road that was used historically under the Coast Guard, that I guess I used when I could climb the stairs. But H3 itself has another road. I'm not talking about the freeway, which is up on stilts. It's an elevated viaduct. Mm-hmm. But to build that, they of course had to build a surface road to get access and do the freeway construction, get all the equipment in. And that surface road is still there. It actually goes pretty much right beneath H3. Yeah. So the next map shows a little bit about some of the possibilities. That the H3 is at the bottom of the map, and there's different ways of accessing it that would go on public roads or across public empty Department of Forest land. There's a lot of ways to get there, to the base of the stairs at the bottom left of this map, all of which bypass the neighborhood, other than the one in yellow, which goes through the neighborhood, but which is how people actually get to the school now that's there. But the one in red is how people go in the Coast Guard. People have talked about white and blue. These are options from Windward or Po'okela Street that would connect to the H3 access road.
Yeah, thanks for showing me the red one, because I'm colorblind, so I was reluctant to say which one it is. But the red route is my preferred route, because that's the old Haiku road. That was the old Navy road, the old Coast Guard road, and it went around the neighborhood. The road is still there. It recently paved that's the entrance into the valley, and it goes right to the base of the stairs.
Absolutely. And again, goes right outside the neighborhood, not near anybody's yard. People wouldn't see the traffic.
Yeah, it's nearly half a mile from the nearest residential neighbor.
Right. And just to mention the last one, there's sort of a lighter red-orange arrow that cuts off that dark red road to the back of the valley. that's road that crosses the former electric company land, which is, again, empty land outside the neighborhood. That's something that the last proposal under the Caldwell administration, they had negotiated access, got permission from all the landowners, except for DOT, who they were negotiating with, but they had gotten draft agreements to go on that route.
Yeah,
and that was another way of
That's
getting
the
there.
private owner who's in support of the stairs,
Yes,
correct?
absolutely. And we've spoken to the owner, who's again willing to provide access. So it's still there. Access is something that can be solved. Okay, so I hope we've kind of made a case that there is a way to solve this problem. We could open the stairs. We could manage them responsibly in a way that is safe and environmentally sustainable, culturally respectful, and would allow people to enjoy this resource, which is incredibly valuable and historic and amazingly beautiful, that so many people have loved over the years, and so many more people, yourself included, are still waiting.
Yeah, I mean, Haiku Valley, I think, in Fort County is like one of those perfect examples of Mauka to Makai. You have the Loi up in the mountains and the stream that goes into Heia. It's a perfect way to demonstrate Hawaiian culture and Hawaiian agriculture if we were to utilize it properly.
Right. And one of the beautiful things about the stairs, of course, you can see the whole ahupua'a of Heia all laid out at your feet and kind of see how it all connects, just the way you described. There even is a mo'olelo about kind of trading reciprocity from people living up there on the ridge who traded with people down fishing below and within the family. But, okay, so there's a way to solve this problem. Unfortunately, the city leaders haven't chosen that way. And the current course of action that the city council voted for and the mayor is currently pushing is to remove the stairs, which is, to me, tragically misguided because there is a solution. But the other thing really disturbing about the planned removal is that it would be incredibly destructive environmentally. And so the next slide shows a little bit about some of the concerns. I mean, the thing is, the stairs, you could never build these stairs today. They were built during the war in an emergency as a critical effort to actually, hopefully talk a little about this, but to build communication systems the Navy needed. So they didn't go through environmental permitting, but this is critical habitat, federally designated critical habitat for multiple endangered species, more than 20. And there are all kinds of species that live there. The city is talking about flying helicopters to lift these 500-pound stair modules that they're going to be dangling on a rope over H3 somehow, and hope nobody...
if you've been around helicopters, the prop wash is something you can't just manage and direct. It's going to be blowing everything all over the place.
Absolutely. To lift a 500-pound stair module, you're going to have massive, huge helicopters. The downwash from their rotors could be up to 100-mile-per-hour winds. Those little snails we saw there, they're going to get blown right off the trees. There'll be all kinds of dust storms, completely contaminating the ecosystem. It's going to cause all kinds of problems with pollinators and birds. Will be, nesting will be disrupted. All kinds of species that live there are going to be completely, interrupted. And they're talking about removing this removal for 2 years. Flying helicopters up to 6 years.
We have residents
6 hours a day for 2 years.
We have residents complaining about helicopters now. Just imagine, continuous operations
back and forth and back and forth. Massive helicopters, 6 hours a day.
For 2 years, right?
For 2 years, yes. So really, potentially, they haven't really, and this is one of the things I mentioned earlier episode, we filed a lawsuit because we're really concerned they never looked at the environmental effects of those helicopters. On these endangered species and its conservation land. So that's one thing we're really concerned about. The other thing is the erosion problem. They're talking about ripping the stairs off the mountain. Those stairs have been there for 80 years. Now the next slide shows a little bit about this. Because you put something on the mountain on a ridge for 80 years, stuff grows around it, dirt piles up. So here's some pictures, but some of the stair modules are completely overgrown, but almost all of them are embedded in at least some layer of dirt. And they're going to have to dig those out. Dig, rip the stairs off the mountain, and what's going to happen? What are they going to leave behind?
I mean, there's a certain amount of settling that's happened now for 80 years.
And
if you go back in there, dig it back up, you're disturbing the dirt, disturbing the soil. You never know what's going to happen with the new disturbance. and how it causes more
Right.
erosion.
Well, to me, the shocking thing is they're not planning to do anything to remediate. They're
Right.
just going to leave that bare ridge
Right.
exposed. Next time it rains, and of course they get a lot of rain up there, that's
Yeah.
the windiest part of the wettest part of the island, and huge windstorms, it's all going to be one muddy mudslide. It's going to wash down
Right.
in a muddy waterfall
Right.
and pollute the watershed, which I guess the next slide shows us a little bit. You know, that ridge is right at the junction of several different streams, most of which lead to Kaneohe Bay. And you mentioned the Loi, and
Right.
the streams themselves have other endangered species that live there, including shrimp and goby fish. So opu and opakai, and that's a real thing. Again, that the people haven't studied. It's a potential problem. You have all that mud washing down. It's going to change the ecology and cause problems for the downstream watershed.
Right.
So another reason why removal makes no sense. It's much better always to leave something in place and try that's been there for a long time
Right.
than try to rip it off the mountain. And of course, leaving the dirt is also going to be a vector for endangered invasive species to spread much more rapidly. It's like a little pico; they can go right up the hill.
Yeah, once you disturb it, you never know what comes and replaces it.
That's right.
Right.
Well, typically it's invasive species that move, unfortunately, much faster than natives, and now they have a path to spread. So the other thing about this, of course, is the expense. Right? Helicopters are not cheap. Price of
Right.
gas has been going up. And if you looked at the cost of all this,
Yeah, I mean, when we first heard about the proposal, the budget for $1 million to remove the stairs, we all knew that wasn't enough, right? And I believe in the EIS, in the previous, when it was under Board of Water Supplies, it was already $3 million. So if...
actually, the EIS was 1 million. That
1
was
million.
the original proposal. And the council, when they voted 2021, they again said, oh yeah, 1 million gets it done. That's what
Right.
they budgeted. But it hasn't stayed that way.
Right, and the costs will grow because it's going to take some time. There's going to be delays, unforeseen delays, and cost is going to grow, and you're going to waste twice as much money, or even 3 times as much money, trying to take down the stairs.
It's another government project,
Right.
the costs are going to grow. And in fact, they already have. The budget originally was 1 million. It's now, they've appropriated $2.8 million, City Council.
Right.
But we just saw a document the city filed just last week in a permit application. They're now saying $4.3 million. That's what they're saying, right?
Right.
And that's an official public document the city submitted. $4.3 million. I don't think the costs are done. It's already gone up 4 times, more than 4 times, but it's going to go up some more. And even just one indication, in 2014, the city submitted an estimate where they were asked how much removal would cost by Kaika Anderson's task force. That estimate then was $4 to $5 million.
Okay, yeah.
In 2014 dollars,
Right.
right? Costs haven't gone down since then, have they?
Yeah. What better way to counter that with managed access? You
Absolutely.
have an asset that can generate funds to be self-sustaining, and you don't have to spend this $4 or $5 million to create another problem for the community.
That's a great point. And yeah, managed access, as we have a detailed plan. The Friends of Haiku Stairs did a feasibility study in 2020. It's on our website at www.haiku.stairs.org.
Right.
So anyone can check it out. It's under the managed access tab. You can see our plan. We looked at, if we charge visitors $50 to $100 in that range, and Kamaina either nothing or $20. We looked at different scenarios.
Right.
And starting with just 80 people a day, but we could grow the capacity to 200. Under any of those scenarios, it easily generates enough revenue.
Right.
That many people paying those fees covers all the expenses and maintenance,
Right.
24/7 security, and would have a surplus. So we'd have
Right.
revenues we could reinvest in the community.
Right. And I think the access to the stairs opens up the access to the rest of the valley. For all the other community groups that have been trying to bring attention to their issues. So if they come to the stairs, they're also learning about the cultural part and the historical parts of the valley.
Absolutely. Yeah, and in our ideal vision, it would be part of one jointly managed community stewardship resource.
Right.
Because the stairs do fit with the other things. They're
Yep.
part of the same story. That
Yep.
Ōlelo, we talked about people living up there and the connections between the uplands and the downlands. And also the history, you mentioned the wartime history.
Right.
A lot of the wartime Navy sites are in the valley, and the stairs were how they built to get up to the top. So yeah, it does make sense to have it all managed together. And could be an amazing cultural park
Right.
that would be a huge attraction, and could be managed responsibly and safely.
Well, I mean, I think I just want to stress, for the longest time it was a top secret facility, and we didn't know what it was. There were rumors of what it does, but when we did find out, it's something that saved the world.
Yeah.
It gave our military the ability to be anywhere in the world that they needed to be to do their mission to protect us, and that's Kaneohe's contribution to the world. That's Hawaii's contribution to the world, that we had this asset that we couldn't talk about, but it was there. And I think that's a credit to many of the service members who also serve in silence, who work in a lot of environments that we can't talk about or never talk about.
Which you were also I don't know, the veteran, at least
I will
know.
say there are some things I will probably never talk about to anyone else, and there's many of those, like our submariners who've worked in very dangerous environments and have secrets to keep. They could never talk about it, but it's honoring their service.
Right.
And honoring those that did protect our country, did serve in silence. But now that we know what it contributed to, we can remember that and remember what other things that are done in such a way.
Yeah, and talking about the stairs' history and how they were used to communicate.
Yeah.
And with some of these communities you mentioned, submariners and people off on missions in all parts of the world. It is an amazing story. So just to kind of close out the discussion of managed access, we do have the next slide. It just shows really briefly some of the points. I want to make sure our viewers understand that we're not talking about a free-for-all with anybody go up there. It's not going to be just open, come on, get it. It's going to be controlled. You would go to a website and register with capacity controls. Key thing is access that bypasses residential neighborhoods. And it would be a paid guided experience to make sure people are going, being respectful when they're there, letting them know about the...
I mean, there's a responsibility to access the stairs.
Yes.
We want to instill that responsibility to people who hike the stairs too.
Absolutely. And our vision is this would be a no-cost, no-risk proposition for the city. That it could be privately managed under a concession. That's what Caldwell proposed. And it would generate surplus revenue. Right. And there would be liability waivers and indemnities, so taxpayers would not be on the hook for anything. And we have volunteers. We're ready to fix the stairs. We did this for 30 years. We were to go up there. We still have engineers and people who are willing to do that work. People would jump at the chance, just like our friends with Coconut Coalition, who fixed their staircase with community labor and donated materials, raised $300,000. We absolutely could do that again with here.
Right.
Okay, so we're working on engaging the community. Next slide shows a little bit about that, and we're doing a lot of things. We did file a lawsuit because we want to just stop the city from moving forward, but we know lawsuits are not going to solve the problem. This is a political thing. We need to engage residents and get people to understand this is their resource. This is something that's precious to all of us.
Right.
And we want government leaders to understand that the majority of people want to see the stairs saved. Okay, and next slide. If people want to get involved, there are ways to do it on our website, which is the next slide. Just to show, again, if you want more information or want to get involved with the Friends of Haiku Stairs, we'd love to have more volunteers, more support. But you were talking, Adriel, about the history, and so let's get to that next. Next slide shows a little bit about the story. So you might wonder, how did a staircase a mile long, 3,000 feet high to the top of a mountain, how did that get built? And it was built during the war in 1942. They started working on it right at the beginning of 1942. Gee, what had happened right before 1942 that maybe motivated them?
Right. Well, so December 7th, 1941 was a...
Next slide. Oh, go ahead.
Like a, life-changing experience for Hawaii.
Right.
And
Pearl Harbor.
Pearl Harbor. It highlighted the importance of Hawaii in the Pacific. Because military strategists for decades before Pearl Harbor had noted the strategic significance of Hawaii in the Pacific. And that came to fruition on December 7th, 1941.
Right. And suddenly the U.S. was facing this war in the biggest ocean of the world.
Right.
And they knew they're going to be fighting this island hopping campaign
Right.
Across this enormous space. Next slide gives a little picture. They didn't have a way to communicate, though. That was the fatal problem.
Yeah.
As they were looking at the strategy, there was no way to communicate with ships and submarines scattered all across this enormous open ocean. They just didn't have technology. There was no, satellites. There was no cell phones. None of that existed.
Yeah.
And they didn't even have a radio transmitter powerful enough to reach across the Pacific. It did not exist. So what did they do?
So Sean, I think you told me about the real meaning behind it. I've always heard about it as a pre-GPS, precursor to GPS.
That's late.
Eight stations around the world that you could triangulate, and it was a low frequency pulse, long wave that could emit all the way to, for sailors under the sea in Tokyo Bay, they could receive a signal from Hawaii.
Right.
And you mentioned there was a messaging system, and that's the top secret part of it. We didn't know about it, and later we benefited from it as a GPS system before we actually had satellites to find our positions around the world.
Yeah. Just to clarify one thing, Adriel, the GPS part and the navigation beacon, that came later after the war. What was built initially was just a way to transmit messages. And this was critical, as I said, because they needed to communicate with the ships and the aircraft carriers who were on these task force on missions going this way and that way. So that was the initial need, was just communication. In fact, they had an even more stronger imperative because they had broken the Japanese code. So they knew what the Japanese were going to do ahead of time. If they could just tell their ships and submarines and get the intelligence to them, they'd have a crucial advantage. But they didn't. They had this problem. There was no transmitter and technology capable of communicating that far across the Pacific. So, this is the greatest generation. They didn't have something. They decided, hey, let's just invent it and build it.
And just to emphasize, the low frequency long wave, you needed the antenna that could span the width of the valley. And so Haiku Valley was the perfect location to get that huge antenna and to be able to emit that wave.
Next slide. You can see there's the cables going right across the valley. They strung these enormous 7,000 feet long, massive heavy steel cables dangling at the top of the mountains, 3,000 feet up. And it was part of this incredible massive power super transmitter, the most powerful radio transmitter ever built at that time.
And so, if you look back at that time, this is cutting edge technology.
Absolutely. It was a communications breakthrough. Revolutionary.
This should be in the annals of histories of, telecommunications, global communications. I have a submariner friend who would, when I talked about Haiku stairs, he knew what it was. He would be in a submarine and he'd be looking at the device and they get that pulse that's coming out from Haiku Valley.
Yeah, absolutely. So next slide shows a little bit about just the inside. This is the actual transmitter. The thing on the valley is the cable. Another slide and two. The thing we don't know about this is all done in secrecy. As the next slide shows, the Navy didn't want to tell anyone. They didn't even tell the Army because they wanted to keep this top secret. They built this huge, massive infrastructure, didn't tell anybody what they were doing. People, of course, saw it and what are they doing? But they didn't know what it was for. Now, the other thing to wonder about is they had these cables, we talked about, going right across the valley, as the picture on the right shows, anchored on one side and the other, it's kind of symmetrically at 3,000 feet high, dangling right across. But how did they get up there? You look how steep that valley is. So next slide shows you.
You got 3 minutes.
Yeah, okay. These guys were high scalers. They spent 21 days climbing that mountain, no ropes. Or I should say, no ropes to go up. There's nothing, just freeze climbing. They made it up, and then one of them had to rappel down. Took him a whole day to go down, straight down, hacking his way through the clouds. But they built, as they built, they hammered in stakes. And next slide shows those stakes became the basis for a wooden ladder that was later a staircase. That's the Haiku stairs. So this is built This is how they got the equipment up there to build this revolutionary super transmitter.
Right.
Without the Haiku stairs, there would be no communications breakthrough.
Right.
The Navy would not have been able to build this thing that contributed directly to winning the war and saving lives.
Right, and how they maintain it for so many years.
That's right, and continue to maintain those cables.
Yep.
It's a really volatile area with high winds and really, lashing rains. They had to go up there to do maintenance.
Right.
The stairs were a main way of getting up there.
Yep.
So, okay, next slides we can skip through really quickly, next few. Of course, next one, and here we go. By 1945, of course, the war is over. The Navy doesn't need the transmitter for wartime.
Right.
But now you talked about, they're thinking, what else can they use with this super powerful low-frequency transmitter? That's when they switched to a navigation beacon
Okay.
and developed this really cool thing, which most of the research was done here again in Haiku radio station, but later part of a worldwide navigation system. You can see, so they still had the cables. Moving ahead, next slide. And the alternator, next slide shows the system. There are 8 stations.
Right.
Ultimately was developed first in Hawaii, but then eventually went global. And having the many different stations, you can triangulate positions, just like we do today with GPS.
Right.
But this is all ground-based before GPS was available, and was used widely, not just for the military, but eventually primarily civilian uses. Because you have container shipping in the age of globalization. You have submarines and airplanes, aircraft.
Right.
All of them use this. Because, what did they have before? Next slide shows, if you wanted to figure out where you were, you got out your sextant and compass.
Yep.
Not so reliable, didn't work very well in good weather. This was way more accurate.
Yeah.
You could get within a mile.
I would say it was probably reliable. But you need specialized knowledge for that.
Well,
with the GPS or with these technology, you could replicate the instruments, and more people could use it, more people could benefit from it.
Far more accurate too. Far more.
Right.
Like within a mile was the Coast Guard system. Anyway, we're about the end of the stairs. So that's the story. It was eventually Ben's Coast Guard, and it's an amazing resource. We would love to save it. Thank you, Adriel, for being part of this conversation. Thank you, all listeners.
you.
We hope you get involved and help us save the Haiku stairs.